Literature, a manifest art, has been enriched by a group of talented Peruvian writers who have left a significant mark in the Latin American literary field and beyond. Throughout the 20th century, European influence contributed to the prestige of these renowned Peruvian writers. Below, we present some of the most famous writers in Peru. Mario Vargas Llosa. Jorge Mario Pedro Vargas Llosa, born on March 28, 1936 in Peru, is an iconic writer, philosopher, politician, and lawyer. Doctor in philosophy and letters from the Complutense University of Madrid, he obtained Spanish nationality in 1993. In 2010, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature, being the only Peruvian novelist to receive this recognition. At 85 years old, Vargas Llosa is the most prominent Peruvian writer today. The City and the Dogs. This social novel recounts the atmosphere of violence in a Peruvian military academy where cadets face harassment and brutal mistreatment from their classmates. Considered Vargas Llosa's first novel, this work marked a milestone of modernity in Latin American literature. Pantaleon and the Visitors, 1973. In this novel, Vargas Llosa displays humor, social realism, and satire. The plot revolves around an army captain who is in charge of recruiting a group of prostitutes for the Peruvian armed forces. César Abraham Vallejo Mendoza. Born on March 16, 1892 in Peru and died on April 15, 1938 in France, he was an influential writer considered the greatest exponent of 20th century literature. His avant-garde lyricism made him the most recognized Peruvian poet at the international level. World. The Black Herald's, 1919, this modernist poem addresses disillusionment, pain, doubt, and death with literary depth. Composed of 17 verses, it describes the anxieties inherent to the human condition. Human Poems, 1939, considered his most emblematic work, this collection of 76 poems was published posthumously and has been recognized as a universal classic. Vallejo, one of Peru's best authors, left a poetic legacy that endures in literary history. Julio Ramón Ribeiro Zúñiga. He was a prominent Peruvian narrator and lawyer. He was born on August 31, 1929 and died on December 4, 1994. He is recognized as one of the best novelists of Latin American literature during the 20th century. He held important positions such as cultural secretary and ambassador to UNESCO. Ribeiro stood out among the main exponents of his country's literature. Los Gallinazos Sin Plumas, 1955. Among the works of Peruvian authors, the well-known story Los Gallinazos Sin Plumas stands out. It is a story of urban realism that narrates the conditions of poverty, exclusion, and oppression experienced by two brothers during their childhood. The Word of the Mute, 1973. This book compiles around 100 stories that reflect the reality of the Inca peasants who moved to the capital of Peru, facing situations of poverty, precariousness, and marginalization. The work has been described as one of the most documented Peruvian literary novels. Ricardo Palma Manuel. He was a prominent Peruvian writer, journalist, and politician. He was born on February 7, 1833 and died on October 6, 1919. He was the creator of the Peruvian Academy of Language. His prolific intellectual career encompassed the movements of Romanticism and Costumbrismo. He was considered the traditionalist author with the greatest literary merits in Latin America. Peruvian Traditions, 1872. It is a collection of brief historical legends that narrate, in a poetic and entertaining way, scenes related to the native customs of Peru. In May 2019, this work was declared Cultural Heritage of the Nation in the country, consolidating Palma as one of the most famous Peruvian writers. José Carlos Mariátegui Lachira. He was a famous Peruvian essayist, philosopher, journalist, and politician. He was born on June 14, 1894 and died on April 16, 1930. He has been considered one of the most relevant essayists of South American culture in the 20th century and founded the Peruvian Socialist Party. 7 Essays on the Interpretation of Peruvian Reality, 1928. Among Peruvian authors and their works, the book 7 Essays should be mentioned as a reference within Marxist political ideology in Latin America. In this book, the author exposes the complicated relationship between the left and capitalism, reflecting his socialist thinking. José Santos Chocano Gastanuji. He was a famous Peruvian writer. After Ricardo Palma, he is considered the most illustrious exponent of Peruvian letters. He was born on May 14, 1875 and died on December 13, 1934. He was decorated as Excellent Poet of Peru in 1922 and stood out among the most popular Peruvian literary authors of his time. Alma America 1906 is a collection of poems in a modernist literary style that earned him the nickname Singer of America and made him stand out among the best Peruvian writers. It was prefaced by the famous Nicaraguan poet Rubén Darío and has been recognized in the Spanish-speaking world. Abraão Valdilo Más Pinto. He was a notable Peruvian short story writer, poet, essayist, journalist, and playwright, considered an intellectual icon. He was born on April 27, 1888 and died on November 3, 1919. He used the pseudonym Conde de Lemos, and his integral artistic temperament was decisive in establishing modernism and avant-garde in Hispanic literature. El Caballero Carmelo 1918. Among the works of Peruvian writers, El Caballero Carmelo is one of the best stories from Peru. It is an anthology of 16 fables cleverly told in the first person. The work has been classified as the most representative story of the ephemeral but admired artistic career of this author. Manuel Scource Torres. He was an accredited Peruvian novelist, poet, editor, and politician. He was born on September 9, 1928 and died on November 27, 1983. His narrative vision focused on Andean magical realism, and he managed to internationalize the organization of book festivals in Latin America. He has been considered one of the most respected famous authors on the old continent. Redoble por Rancas 1970. This novel reveals the violations suffered by the peasants of the central Andes of Peru between 1950 and 1962. Based on the historical conflicts arising from the vassalage suffered by indigenous peoples, the work gave Scorza a privileged perspective among the names of Peruvian writers. Jorge Eduardo Ayelsen Sánchez. He was a prominent Peruvian poet, essayist, playwright, journalist, painter, and sculptor. He was born on April 13, 1924 and died on March 8, 2006. He is recognized as one of the greatest exponents of Hispanic poetry in the 20th century. His work was characterized by being conceptual and based on aesthetic experience, even when a specific object was not present. Room in Rome, 1952. Among the literary works of Peruvian authors, the collection of poems Room in Rome stands out. Written during his time of exile in Europe, it was originally published in 2008. In this book, with fine language, it narrates the author's emotional variations when facing the feeling of loneliness. Oswaldo Reynoso Díaz. Renowned Peruvian novelist and educator. He was born on April 10, 1931 and died on May 24, 2016. Reynoso's lyrical poetry was well received not only by the youth of his time but also by future generations of readers. The Innocents 1961. It is a book of urban realism stories in which the author introduces phrases typical of adolescents who live in metropolises. This work gave notoriety to the popular Peruvian vocabulary and established Reynoso as an outstanding novelist in the modern narrative of Peru. Luis Alberto Sánchez Sánchez. Outstanding Peruvian writer, historian, journalist, lawyer, translator, and politician. He was born on October 12, 1900 and died on February 6, 1994. His numerous literary contributions earned him the Jaime Bosate y Mesa Prize from the Spanish Embassy, and he is considered among the best authors of Peruvian literature. Peruvian literature. Path for a Cultural History of Peru, 1936. When talking about Peruvian works and authors, Peruvian literature. Path for a Cultural History of Peru is essential reading. Originally published between 1929 and 1936, the book examines the literary careers of important figures such as Abraham Valdelamar, José Carlos Mariátegui, Ciro Alegría, José María Argudas, Martín Audán, Sebastián Salazar Bondi, Javier Herod, among others. Martín Adán Ramón Rafael de la Fuente Benavides. He wrote under the pseudonym Martín Audán. He was a prominent Peruvian writer. He was born on October 27, 1908 and died on January 29, 1985. His biography was full of literary depth and existential difficulties, and he was a disciple of Luis Alberto Sánchez. The Cardboard House, 1928. It is his first novel and is considered the most emblematic literary creation of this Peruvian writer. It is a modern poetic story that narrates in depth his teenage years. Written in lyrical prose, this book gave him popularity in Latin American avant-garde literature and made him one of the most recognized Peruvian poets. Sebastián Salazar Bondi. Peruvian writer, playwright, and journalist. He was born on February 4, 1924 and died on July 4, 1965. He is considered one of the greatest representatives of the modernization of Peruvian literature, initiated by the so-called Generation of 50. His contribution to literature is reflected in his analyses about contemporary Peruvian reality. Lima la Horrible, 1964, it is the most important work of this Peruvian essayist, who, through a semantic approach, sought to demystify the image of colonial Arcadia of the capital of his country. The book is a rigorous criticism of the temperament of Lima society. And in this way we would be reaching the end of the video. Remember to leave your thumb up to support our project as well as subscribe. Leave me in the comments, what do you think about these writers? Did you already know them? We will be happy to read it. Thank you very much in advance for watching the video and we'll see you next time.